Ever since ancient history, humans have admired and worshipped large creatures, from legends pertaining to humongous dragons to humanoid giants. And the subject of this video, giant automata, especially the kind that is piloted by a lone human controlling it from within, usually called Mecha. I intend in this video to include a quick rundown of what is Mecha, and then some personal musings of what this genre means to me. For those who might not know, the origins of this genre of Japanese media are commonly traced back to Tetsuji Niju Hachigo, whose 1966 manga was adapted to black and white animation in the 60s. It featured a giant robot that received commands from a young protagonist with a remote control. The more traditional piloted mech would have its debut later in 1972 with Mazinger Z, featuring hot-blooded youth Kabuto Koji commanding the robot his grandpa left him by docking his small flying vehicle on its head. The Mazinger was described as a weapon of great power that could allow Koji to become either a god or a demon. In a way, the Mazinger meant godlike power, and the responsibility that came with it, not unlike a classic superhero story. This concept would be iterated on throughout the years, either by direct sequels to Mazinger's story, or through other ideas like Getter Robo, in which the title robot would be produced by the fusion of three aircrafts symbolizing the teamwork between the three protagonists, creating the idea of the combining robot most in the West nowadays associate with Power Rangers. These super robots, as they started to be called, were powerful and fought evil robots, giant monsters, or even aliens, almost always piloted by heroic protagonists. With time, a new type of idea also came to be. With 1979's Ido Senshi Gundam, Mobile Suit Gundam, the title robot was a powerful one, but instead of acting like a lone superhero against the forces of evil, it was now inserted into a scenario of war between humans in space, with its pilot, Amuro Rei, dealing firsthand with the realities of war and human connection. The Mecha meant a weapon capable of turning the tides of war. Some would come to classify the shows that directly followed the footsteps of Gundam with the moniker of real robots, due to the more grounded workings of the mechs themselves and serious storylines. But I want to be clear that it's not uncommon to find works that blur these arbitrary lines, which is what they are at the end of the day. With new works coming out in various different kinds of shapes and themes, we slowly arrive at the 2000s, where I myself grew and was able to first witness these robots. During these early years of the current century, my own introduction to Mecha was a bit gradual, and probably a bit different from a lot of the fandom. Aside from already being into mechanical-like designs, like some of the creations from Digimon and the Bionicle line of Legos, one of my first experiences with Mecha can be traced back to a friend putting a demo disc on his PS2, and then running a game that was quite unlike anything I have seen to this day, Zone of the Enders: The Second Runner. That game had certainly left an impression. Not only was the combat fast and fluid, but the giant robot itself seemed much more than a robot. Its design and the aura it gave off felt almost mystical. My contact with the animated side of Mecha would remain quite limited due to the lack of offerings in my local television in Portugal, until I randomly came across a certain game on the GBA that implanted a certain name on my mind. Mobile Suit Gundam Seed Battle Assault. Yes, that was actually how I got into Gundam. It was a very simple fighting game that pit characters using these mobile suits. Yeah. As a kid, I wasn't entirely sure if the Gundams were giant robots or just power armor because of that mobile suit part of the title, and it didn't seem obvious enough for me through the game because of the limited GBA graphics. But this is only a silly little tangent. In any case, the designs looked kinda cool, and I could glimpse hints of a tragic storyline about war and friends being forced to fight each other. But this was the seed, no pun intended, into finding out about the large amount of shows with the Gundam name, all growing from the legacy of the original 1979 show, up to this day with Mobile Suit Gundam: The Witch from Mercury being the most recent TV show at the time of this video. So at this point in my life, big robots were something I felt like I liked, but I wasn't immersed into the culture of mecha fandom just yet. It only came a bit when I was a teen and I felt like asking for an epic anime with big robots. I don't even remember why I asked for that specifically. Maybe I just felt like it because, yeah, I was kind of interested in big robots, but I hadn't yet watched the show that had rocked my socks off. And so it was there, in the thread of an old late 2000s anime forum, that I got recommended a show that you, watching this video, might have heard of too, even if you aren't into mecha culture. Tengen Toppa Gurren Laggann. I confess that the name wasn't completely strange to me at that point, as I remember seeing it in the top spot of the rankings of my anime list at the time. As for the anime itself, it was more than I expected and then some. The story of a young boy and his confident brother figure using a robot head they found to battle the forces that kept humanity living in the underground. An epic saga that grows until the survival of the very concept of an evolving species is fought over in a galactic scale against forces that fight for stagnation, culminating in the once young protagonist becoming like the man he looked up to in his old way, a tale of hot blood, determination, and always fighting the odds. I still remember watching the final arc of the show until 4 AM, really wanted to see the heroes and their mechs overcome the seemingly impossible challenges with big grins on their faces. The impact the show left on me is something I still feel to this day. At a time of my life where I was feeling down to the usual struggles of adolescence, Tengen Toppa Gurren Laggann pushed me into being more positive like the characters in the show, especially Kamena and later Shimon. But not all mecha is Gurren Laggann, and so it was after that I eventually got even more curious about the genre. What kind of other works had inspired this? If Gurren Laggann was built on an already existing legacy, what did that legacy look like? Because of this, I want to take a moment to talk about Super Robot Wars. For those who don't know, this is a video game franchise of more than 30 years, taking form of strategy RPGs, where you command parties of mecha and their pilots from various shows. Their stories retooled into a single one for the purposes of the game. It is a huge celebration of the genre in video game form, where you can see the Mazinger fight side by side with the Gundam. Obviously, anyone getting into these games as an initiate will always have to contend with having to be flooded with a lot of unknown characters and robots they might not know. But that doesn't always have to be a bad thing. In fact, that is how I've been finding out new shows to watch. This is how I learned about all the different Gundam continuities. And then two other properties that I believe were very important in paving the way for Gurren Laggann. The first was Getter Robo, which admittedly I was kinda dismissing at first due to the more Saturday morning cartoon-like fiction present in most of the older Super Robot Wars titles, which originated from the TV animation from Toei back in the 70s. It wasn't until I fired up a later game that I noticed the characters drawn in a more different style. It looked aggressive, unhinged even, and kinda reminiscent in my mind to Tengen Toppa Gurren Laggann. Apparently that style came from an OVA of the property that was much more in line tone-wise with the manga, featuring a darker story that goes from a pretty straightforward war against the dinosaur empire to a tale of foreboding doom about the evolution of the titular mech into an eldritch horror. And then, of course, there is Gaogaigar, which really brings out similar themes of heroism present in Gurren Laggann, alongside the large-scale fights. Personally, I would recommend it to anyone who has enjoyed Tengen Toppa. So, with all of the introductions out of the way, we finally arrive at the main point of this video. What does mecha mean? Of course, I am talking in a very abstract way, about the symbolism of giant robots. And, full disclosure, this is my very own personal feelings on the matter, reflecting on what fascinates me about these superpowered giant automata. There is always something that seems to permeate almost every story I look at, especially the ones that have resonated more strongly with me. Remember the Mazinger Z, how it was described as something that can either become a god or a devil. These giant robots can combat monsters, single-handedly turn the tide of wars, and even sometimes consume its very pilots and bring about Armageddon. There is something quite godly about these machines. Curiously, the fact that they are designed in the image of humans lend more to that. Like any tool or weapon, they are just as useful or moral as the person handling their controls, which is why the best mecha shows are the ones where the characters can be just as iconic as their mechas, one being an extension of the other, like King Arthur and his Excalibur. Because of this human element in design and use, the mecha is usually symbolic of the human spirit, I feel. Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn, as its titular robot, symbolize the concept of possibility, very present in Japanese media. The heaven-piercing Gurren Laggann is fueled by human determination, and the Evangelions use the walls of their pilots' souls as their main tools. Not to say that mecha can't also have an alien element. The Getter Robo is powered by rays from outer space, which harbor a mysterious will with the power of evolution, not against assimilating the pilots and growing in size until becoming a galactic-sized conqueror. In this case, the mecha can also be eldritch in nature, but even something like Getter Emperor can both be seen as a terrifying demon and as the ultimate god of mankind in the context of its story. With the current rise of technology, including the recent developments in AI, the mecha can also be a representation of our relationship with technology, by quite literally cladding yourself in a suit of the highest technology possible and impossible, yet being incapable to really escape the consequences of the real world. Think about how a pilot, even inside their comfortable cockpit, can still be crushed, or even brought to their physical and biological limits by the systems of the machine itself. Sometimes a normal human cannot keep up with the mecha, and so the topic of transhumanism manages to crop up in this relationship between man and machine. And yet, this too is part of the human spirit, to keep iterating on ourselves and our tools for more power, seemingly reaching for some far-off stars, creating something in our image. Well, those were just a bunch of words that I just said, and I could just summarize everything with, "Whoa, cool robot," and I would be half right. But I really believe there is something a bit more deep to that, and not all fans of these same kind of stories might have their own answers over what these giant robots mean to them. But this is mostly my answer. Something about the human spirit embodied into an all-powerful machine. I really love Mecha. It has been there when I most needed it, and provided amazing characters, epic music, fun hobbies, and a legacy of works that have had a long-lasting impact in pop culture. I hope I was able to transmit my thoughts well in this video, and thank you for watching.